Okay, what I want to cover in this video is providing sort of um, a list, and I have it written down. And what I'll do is I'll also put it on our website, and then provide the link over to it so that you guys can have it. It will be embedded within this video, um, uh, in the post section or in the comment section, so that you can link it to where, if you want to, if you find it valuable, um, to be able to print it out and use it as an example. And yesterday I made a video, a very impassioned video, about how I feel about these schools that have announced virtual only options, um, being that we live in an environment where no waivers for the legal requirement to provide a free and appropriate public education doesn't exist. And being that Alabama, for example, is a state that doesn't have a governor's order mandating the closure of schools, then at that point, any kind of claim that no other options exist is as patently false. And then we found out today that the High School Athletic Association in Alabama um, is saying full steam ahead with regards to athletics for the fall. Now, schools can get cute and say, well, it's just outside practice, it's not inside. Guys, I don't care. Football's a contact sport. I mean, you sweat. I mean, I played football. Don't tell me. And also, just stop with the justifications, okay? And what I absolutely find fascinating is how the public schools, whether they know they're doing it or not, is actually perpetuating stereotypes and reinforcing that. Where the jocks and the athletes and the cheerleaders and the popular kids all get to return to their social activities, and everyone else don't. So I just find that rather odd that that's the world we're living in. Is that those children, I guess, are more equal than everyone else, to put it into Animal Farm lingo, and it just isn't right. So, under that kind of logic, it is absolutely possible that, let's say, I have a student athlete that is also a football player who has an IEP for dyslexia. Their academics and their IEP aren't being served, but the child can, or the student's going to be able to go up and participate in school activities with regards to football. Now, wrap your head around that one. Okay, so as far as my video, I made it yesterday. I pulled it off just simply because it just wasn't. I really try to be controlled in my responses to all of this. It destroys my peace otherwise. And yesterday, I got impassioned, and I can see where it could be misinterpreted. Because, guys, at the end of the day, I'm not an enemy to public education. Okay, I would not be doing this if I was. I believe in public education. I believe in this civil rights law. I believe that schools can do it. My daughter is an example of the success of public schools' ability to provide children with a free and appropriate public education. And my daughter has had it, and she's had wonderful, miraculous, uh, incredible teachers and support staff working with her since she was in preschool. And so you're never going to hear a complaint from me about stuff like that. It can be done. What always frustrates me is the short-sightedness related to it can't be, and I don't believe that. And the other hardcore evidentiary testament to the success of FAPE are all of those clients that I've represented over the years, to where their settlement agreements rely upon the public educators and the administrators implementing those solutions. And then the fact that I haven't had to come back a second time, a third time, and the relationship in the IEP team and the services provided to the child are marked by success and positivity. and that's been the constant, guys. It hasn't been all this turmoil. So I know it works, but it's just the short-sightedness of well, mainly administration. Sometimes the union is an impediment. I have a feeling that in this particular situation, um, the union's driving some of these decisions, depending on the school district. But the state of Alabama itself, for example, has not put restrictions on school reopenings. All right. I mean, I'm not very happy with the Alabama State Department of Education. Um, for some reason, the Alabama High School Athletic Association seemed to make a decision and a firm one, and that's just how it is. So, including, there's no limitations to how many fans can be in the stand. That's going to be a school by school decision. I don't have a problem with that. But please understand that if you're a virtual only school for the first 9 weeks, but yet you're operating your sports facilities, can you appreciate why I'm having an issue and why I'm questioning your motives? Okay? Because if you can do it for them, you can find out a way to serve our most vulnerable students in an in-person setting. So let's go with this. And what I did was I created a document, and I'm going to sit there and split screen this for a second. And it's in a format, and guys, it's a crude. I just threw this together. It didn't take me that long. All right, so don't judge me. All right. Okay, so if you look at this is my belief, okay, based upon the law of what it is that would be your next steps at this point, okay? And I developed this under the idea and under the notion of two things. Oh, here we go. Move. See. Okay. Under two ideas. First of all, we're going to address if the IEP has already been developed, meaning that it was developed in the spring or over the summer. And so you already have a 2021 IEP in place. And that would include some of you that your IEPs fall, let's say January to January. All right, because if you have a January to January IEP, then you don't need to sit there and screw with it. You already have an active IEP. So my first point is going to be if the IEP has already been developed. Then I'm going to go into what to do if you don't have a current IEP and everybody sort of kicked the can until the start of school to develop it. So we're going to deal with both. And then I do have a third one on there, and that is for educators. My advice to educators, meaning teachers, not necessarily administrators, but sort of the responsibility of educators in case they have that question when you have a legal requirement in the form of developing an IEP as an IEP team member that is anticipated to provide a child with a free and appropriate public education. And that might run in contradiction to the decisions of the Board of Education and your administration, which is not uncommon, guys. But I can tell you right now that a Board of Education cannot get rid of, suspend, weaken, damage, destroy a child's right to a free and appropriate public education. They just can't do that. And so no matter whatever policies that they put in place, the federal civil right that your child has in the form of their IEP, their 504, and under the Americans with Disabilities Act trump what boards of education do. All right, they've got to fall in line with that. And so the pecking order is Constitution, and then federal law, federal acts, federal regulations, those kind of things. And then you have state law, and then it goes all the way down, guys, to boards of education. But they're on the lowest rung of the totem pole. Okay, they're not up there high. So your child and their right to a free and appropriate public education is a civil right, and provided for by Congress. And therefore, boards of education outside of any waivers, which did not happen, can't sit there and do anything about that. which is what puts a lot of these schools in a litigious situation, which they're in currently, those that are being rigid in their opening responses. And that includes those that are only doing in-person traditional school days only, because there's going to be children out there that should be provided the flexibility and the option for virtual or distant learning or some kind of hybrid due to their high risk medical needs, things of that nature. So it does go both ways, but in this particular situation, I'm specifically talking about those children that are in-person learners, that distant learning was a disaster for them. And let me go ahead and tell you, the teachers know. The teachers know which students are benefiting from distant learning or virtual learning and which students just cannot. And so I'm talking about the students that cannot. And we also know that the science sort of tells us that a lot of this distant learning just is not beneficial. There's a lot of questions there. Also, there's going to be a big question whether or not that even meets the standard of specialized instruction. And it sort of depends on how it's done. I'm not necessarily going to get into that minutia, but I'm throwing it out there. And so let's get into this. That's me. That's not the, here we go. Okay. So, checklist for 2021 school year. If the IEP has already been developed, then in the spring, or let's say you have one that tracks year to year, then how was it developed? You need to think about that. How was it developed? Did they already lace in, let's say in the spring or let's say over the summer, that they snuck in virtual into the IEP in anticipation for, virtual learning or distant learning? Guys, and then you don't have a good IEP. If your IEP is not developed in a way that provides your child with a free and appropriate public education, then you need to go back to the drawing board, because an IEP created for virtual learning or distant learning isn't necessarily, for the mass majority of children, doesn't anticipate or isn't developed for the purposes of providing a child with a FAPE. Okay? And that's what should be developed. You should be developing an IEP as though none of this stuff is going on. Because at some point during this school year, of course, that's a positive, and I absolutely believe that that's what's going to happen, is that children will transition back to a traditional learning environment, at least the mass majority. And if that's the case, that's what FAPE is that traditional learning environment. And so therefore, that should be how the IEP is developed. And that is the legal responsibility of the school district, to develop the IEP in such a way based upon current levels of performance, which means that you may need to update the evaluations and assessments. Otherwise, you're going to be in trouble, school districts. If you haven't updated anything since all the kids were sent home in March, got a problem there. Because how are you going to sit there and gauge current levels when regression might have occurred, likely might have occurred with many students? So if you're developing an IEP and you haven't updated current levels of performance, then you've got a potential problem there, potential exposed to not be, because even if you develop an IEP like I'm recommending, but you didn't update current levels of performance and all those are wackadoo, and then later in the 2021 school year, the child didn't make progress, or because your current levels of performance were so poorly off, the child made massive gains to the point where, your IEP once again was wackadoo, and it was not designed in such a way to challenge a child, to have the child tangibly progress based upon current and understood levels of performance. And instead, they said, well, we think the child's here, when in reality, the child had progressed to here. And then you set lowball goals, which the child met early or could already do before you even established the IEP. At that point, it just is. Oh, it's a little bit insane I'm going to go ahead and throw myself up there for a second. Then it's a little bit insane to think that IEP provided a FAPE. Because we run into that all the time where the parents were like, well, hell, my kid could already do all that stuff before the school year ever started. And then we end up doing the necessary analysis and finding out that that's just because the school district was guessing, shooting in the dark, trying to figure out what present levels of performance were, or intentionally setting the mark into areas where they knew the child was already performing. That's a violation of FAPE as well, okay, from the opposite perspective. And so you got to make sure that those present levels are correct. And guys, in Alabama, I don't feel sorry for you. Okay, the state superintendent and the governor allowed for in-person evaluations to continue in March. I mean, in June, sorry, strike that. In June. And I can't tell you how many school systems did not move forward with in-person evaluations and trying to update this information. That's a choice. That was a decision. That was a conscious decision. You could have done it. You didn't do it. So you get no pity from me. Got it? All right. So if the IEP is already developed for implementation in traditional setting or virtual, so if the traditional setting, if it was developed like I had recommended, as though none of this is going on, okay, then do not change it, and do not allow the school to change it. If they're trying to shove documents in your face, trying to get you to waive your rights or waive whatever, do not do it. Do not agree to it. What the hell's wrong with you? Don't do stuff like that. You have a traditional IEP. This is what is recommended to provide a FAPE. Okay? That's what needs to be developed. The school has the responsibility, legal responsibility. Don't give them a pass by signing a waiver. Come on, guys. Or allowing them to change it to satisfy whatever whims are going on, like virtual only. Okay, they've got to figure this out, and they have the capability of figuring it out. If they can sit there and have band practice and football practice, cheerleading practice, then they can figure out a way to provide our most vulnerable students with special education services 5 days a week. Okay? Doesn't mean the entire school has to go, but they can do it for those that the only way that they can receive a free and appropriate public education is in their in-school environment. Okay? So if it is developed or was developed for virtual, then you believe that the IEP can properly provide your child a FAPE, then don't do anything, okay? I mean, there's going to be some of you guys. It's going to be rare, but there are going to be some of you that are like, oh, I thought virtual learning, my child progressed and I thought it was great. Now, how do I know that? I've developed settlement agreements for those children that do benefit from virtual learning. And in-school environment's toxic for them. So for them, that's what FAPE is, okay? So I am arguing from all in, guys, because this is individualized. And so for those kids, if your IEP was developed in a virtual manner and it works, and in-person services just aren't that important, and then you're seeing your child progress and FAPE can be attained that way, don't screw with it. That's FAPE for your child. But if your child is one of those that cannot learn in that way, then no. Then your IEP was not developed properly and it needs to be challenged. It needs to be corrected. Okay? Now, how do you do that? Okay, if the school is wanting you to amend to reflect the virtual learning for the first 9 weeks, I'm throwing it out there for those schools that have announced virtual learning for the first 9 weeks with no other options, or longer, then you need to resist. If you do not believe that your child can receive a FAPE through virtual learning, then do not agree to the change and make them unilaterally notate the change in a prior written notice, meaning that force them to sit there and tell you that it's their way or the highway. Now, why am I encouraging you to force them to write that down? Because that's how the process works, guys. You know, that's how the process works. I know that that sucks, but that's how it works. The IEP team is not a majority votes. They don't somehow get to run roughshod over you. They just don't get that authority. Okay? Now, if there's a disagreement on the IEP team, then the school can sit there and unilaterally notate that this is what's going to happen because they're the ones with the legal duty to provide a FAPE. Now, if you wholeheartedly feel that what they're doing is wrong and is denying your child their rightful placement, free and appropriate public education, whatever, then at that point, guys, it doesn't stop the implementation of whatever that crappy IEP is that you disagree with unless you trigger your dispute resolution options. And the dispute resolution options include a state complaint, due process complaint, requesting mediation. All right? So that is the choice. So if there's a disagreement and consensus is not achieved, and consensus is that everybody agrees, if it doesn't happen, let's say that they're sitting there going, well, we're doing virtual learning and we're not offering anything else. Then you sit there and you go, no, this traditional IEP provides a free and appropriate public education for my child. My child requires in-person services, and you have the capability to provide that. There are no restrictions from the state mandating that you can't, and the feds have provided no waiver to where you have some diluted level of legal responsibility. And because of that, this traditional IEP is what my child requires to provide a FAPE, and we've got to figure that out. And if they say, well, that's too bad, so sad, and we're doing virtual only, then that's where you sit there and say, well, I need a prior written notice from you stating that you guys do not plan to implement this traditional IEP. And that's what they need to do. The school administration needs to write down that in the prior written notice that that there's a disagreement on the team, and that that they are. I don't care how they word it. They can sit there and word it that they can't. They wish they could, but they can't. I don't care how they do it. They can sit there and lace it up, but and put tears on it. It doesn't matter. What matters is that you've got to have it notated that a disagreement exists, that this is what a FAPE is, and they're saying that they can only do it a different way. Now, once you get that prior written notice, guys, you're going to have to sit there and file a due process complaint. Why? Is you need to assert stay put, okay? And let me get back to this. The school district tries to change the IEP to reflect their virtual environment and you disagree, then you must act quickly to file a due process complaint to assert stay put, okay? And assert that and put in there that the last agreed upon IEP is the one developed for traditional school in-person instructional setting. So what you're trying to do through stay put is say that you want the last agreed upon IEP to be the controlling and ruling IEP, and not the one that the school district's trying to shove in front of your face that's virtual only, okay? Because that's going to be important for you. Well, I don't know how important it is in this environment, guys, because quite frankly, if your child is one that doesn't learn, I could care less what their IEP says, because in the due process complaint, that is exactly what you're arguing, is that the school district is not providing and did not develop an IEP that is calculated to provide your child with a FAPE, all right? And so that's what the entire case is. But if you want to try to prevent that virtual one from being implemented, then that's what you would need to do, is fairly quickly, almost immediately. Prior written notice will either have that they're going to implement it immediately and therefore give you no time, which is wrong. They really shouldn't do that, especially if they fully understand that there's a disagreement between the parent and the school part of the IEP team. They really shouldn't do that. It's just bad practice. What they should do is there's another box in prior written notice that says that the parents have 10 days in order to think about it or file a due process complaint. And I think that that's a better option for schools to do, because hearing officers and judges don't look very kindly at the bullying aspect that schools say, I know you had a disagreement, but we're making this change immediately. But if they do that, then fine, guys. I mean, you can still assert stay put, and just cite in there that in the prior written notice that you requested 5 days or 10 days, and they wouldn't give it to you. And in fact, if they do that, then I would notate on the prior written notice in the official copy before you leave. Make sure that the school gets any notations that you make on the official document, and I would put in there that you had requested 5 or 10 days to think about it, and they rejected your request for additional time. That way, it's notated in the original hard copy that you had tried to be reasonable with them. Because once you get into this process, guys, it's going to be a game of meanies. Who was mean. And schools, it's very, very bad practice for schools to attack children. They very rarely ever do it. It's just bad politics, bad strategy. So they end up going after parents, just super concerned. Oh, well, she's asking for too much. Oh, she's a helicopter mom. That's the normal, typical stuff that I see. Okay. That's why I always say, be controlled over your emotions. All right. Be businesslike. Don't give them an opportunity to frame you and your personality by not having those things under control. And also, guys, it doesn't, a lot of the people on the IEP team are captive as well. All right. Some of them didn't choose to be there, and some of them are being told and directed what to do by administration and aren't necessarily happy with what they're being told to do. So just keep that in mind. Okay. The school cannot make changes to your IEP without your participation and knowledge. If through an IEP meeting or by your approval, they cannot do that, guys. Only through an IEP meeting or through your approval, meaning that they can call you up, and in some situations, you can verbally agree to make changes, minor ones, to the IEP document without convening the entire team. Okay, so some schools may attempt to do that. Don't agree to it. Don't allow them to make the changes. Some of them are going to do that anyway and just screw up the entire IEP process. And if they do, then guys, I would scream up and down, because they just gave you a gift. They just can't do stuff like that. If you do not agree with virtual and it won't be sufficient to provide your child with a FAPE, then you must stand your ground and notate in writing that you disagree. And that is anywhere where there is blank space on the official documents that they are putting in front of you, like the signature page of the IEP. All right? Write in the margins. Explain that you do not agree. Explain why you do not agree. These are the official documents. Do not leave that meeting until you have a copy of whatever it is that you have notated. Okay? Because I've had situations before where the parents are like, oh, well, don't worry, James, I notated it on the IEP. And then we end up getting it back and their notations weren't there. Guys, it's amazing what you can do with a computer and a PDF program and some whiteout. All right? So don't leave your meetings without having a copy of whatever it is you notated. Be smarter than that. Okay, if the district is offering a hybrid model of virtual and in-person instruction, but your child requires more than a few days a week of in-person instruction, And they're not, and this is also going to be a problem if you believe that your child requires a full school program in order for them to receive a FAPE. If this is an option you choose, then that's different than if the school mandates a broken schedule program, meaning alternating days, and says that your child can only attend a set number of days. This is inappropriate as well for many, many children. Okay, so you don't get half FAPE, you get full FAPE. So I don't have a problem with these hybrid models if they meet the parents' needs, meaning that you still, hold on, let me, so meaning that if you still have to have a developed IEP that provides for a full FAPE, and that's a traditional IEP. If the parent then says, I think that hybrid model is going to work for us, okay? And that's what I would prefer to limit my child's exposure, whatever, then fine. Then what you do is you establish your traditional 5-day-a-week in-person IEP, and then you develop or you write in a prior written notice that this traditional IEP is what was developed by the team to provide the child a FAPE. But due to COVID and parent preference, we're agreeing to a hybrid model in the interim or for a short period, because at that point it covers the basis. Everybody acknowledges that this is FAPE. This hybrid is not FAPE, but the hybrid is being agreed to temporarily, and the parents are okay with that. Okay? But this is FAPE, not this. Okay? So you can establish a foundational IEP that does provide for a FAPE, and then through parent agreement, do virtual, do hybrid, and do some other model that works. But those of you whose children absolutely cannot do it that way, if you choose virtual, if you choose the hybrid model, fine. But at that point, guys, don't sit there and look at the school and say, well, you didn't provide my child with a FAPE. Well, that's because this is FAPE, not hybrid. This is. And I'm fine with hybrid models. My child's going to do one. I'm okay with that. But you understand that that's my decision during this crazy period we're in. But I can't sit there and turn around and be unfair to my school district and say, damn it, guys, you knew my child needed X number of times and you'd let me do this hybrid thing. And now I'm mad because I'm telling you, there's going to be parents like that. Just wait until March and April when all this is, let's say a potential forgotten memory. And you just wait. Those school systems that got suckered into creating hybrid IEPs or virtual only IEPs, was that a FAPE? No, you knew damn well it wasn't a FAPE. So why would you develop an IEP that you knew could not possibly provide that child with a free and appropriate public education? And if you sit there and say, well, we acquiesce to the parent doesn't have the legal duty to provide a FAPE. You do, as a public school system. So the easiest thing to do, guys, is to develop a damn IEP that does provide for a FAPE in a traditional school setting. And then all you got to do is create a prior written notice to explain whatever everybody agrees upon. Okay? And if you go, well, if we do that way, the parent may want that, and then our Board of Education, shut the school to virtual only. Guys, there's not a thing you can do about the conflicts that are coming. There's not a thing you can do about it. Board of Education made their decision, superintendent made their decision, administrators made their decision. But you as an educator, why get in the middle of it? There's going to be a disagreement regardless of what you do. So you might as well just do what the law says and create a traditional IEP that does provide the child a FAPE, and then notate very good in the prior written notice that the parent the school system has gone to virtual only, and the parent disagrees with it. And then give them the documentation and let the parent file due process. But at least you're covered as an educator, because you and the rest of the team developed an IEP that you knew would provide a FAPE. But the Board of Education or whatever administrator made a different decision, which is their prerogative. And then they get to meet with the legal consequences. But you shouldn't be a participant in that. Be smarter than that. But, parents, that goes for you too. I mean, don't purposefully, let's say, for example, set your school up and go, oh, I'm going to trick them and I'm going to sucker them into a hybrid model or sucker them into a virtual only IEP, and then wait and complain about it. Because I can tell you, if you call me, I'm going to ask all those questions. Because there's a big thing, because I've done this long enough to sit there and smoke the parents out that I feel are big contributing factors to the problems. And sometimes I will keep my mouth shut and I'll move forward with the case if I believe it's beneficial to the child and I think that there's a capability on my end to be able to help the parent unlearn bad strategies, and then learn how to be a good positive advocate and a good positive conducive participant on an IEP team. Okay. But I can tell you, I can sniff BS, and I just don't recommend any parents playing these games. Okay. But on the same side, I recommend schools be smarter and, develop IEPs that are going to be providing a free and appropriate public education. So if your school district has not updated current levels of functioning through assessments, evaluations, then this needs to be done ASAP, and then changes need to be made to the IEP according to those results. And so any justified demand for compensatory recovery services would be based upon those updated assessments as well. I'll scroll down in just a second. Now, what does that mean? Guys, the school shut down in March, okay? And that was due mandate. And then April 6th was around the time that most schools opened back up virtually, okay? Their physical doors didn't open, but they were supposed to be providing services virtually. Well, we know that after that point, meaning April 6th until the end of school, and then also summer is going to be included in that, and then the fall. Now, unfortunately, with this new debacle that we're facing in some of our schools. So you have a potential claim for compensatory recovery services from April 6th until the end of the school year if your distant learning just absolutely sucked or non-existent. All right, so you got a potential claim there. Then let's say your child required extended school year services, and since they were allowing in-person services starting back up, or if they didn't come up with any alternative and they didn't do anything at all, then you potentially have another claim for summer. Then moving into the fall, if they do this virtual only and your child still hasn't been, guys, you're talking disaster level here. And so if the school hasn't done any kind of updated assessments, evaluations, then how do you know and how can you gauge regression? Now, you might want to go get your own sort of probes and evaluations done if you can afford that through, let's say, BC behavior analyst can do some, psychologist. You can even get retired teachers and psychometrists to do some probes and comparatively with what they were doing in March and sort of gauge where they're at. You can do your own. Lindemood Bell, Learning Processes, they have a whole battery of reading and math assessments that I think are really good, and I think that they charge right, I don't know, $350, right around there. Then you also have Denise Harrell, DH Reed, which has provided some stuff here. They can do a lot of the stuff virtually and provide updated assessments for your child in the area of reading. in math as well. And I'll tag her in this so that anybody interested in reaching out to her. I know of, like, let's say in North Alabama, you have Greengate. There's a clinical psychologist. So if you want to sit there and get those things now as a parent and you can afford to do it, then do it. If you cannot, then you need the school to do it, okay? And the schools need to update those assessments. But by updating those assessments, if you do not agree with the results, guys, and that's what the second part is, then you have a right to request an independent evaluation, and an independent education evaluation is one that the school pays for with a professional of your choosing, okay? And we'll get into the little parameters, or you can ask me about those parameters, but they're very limited on how they can dictate who you use. Very limited. So those of you who cannot afford to go get your own, that's how you need to do it. Is to have the school complete their own, and then if you disagree, submit a written request for an independent evaluation paid for by the school or with a professional of your choosing. Okay, so let's say 2020-21 IEP, if you have not developed the IEP yet, and so you're entering the new school year with no IEP, with no current IEP, you need to make a request ASAP for an IEP meeting to develop that IEP. And then you need to make sure that you either record or take very good notes if you live in a state where recording is not allowed. I think it's a federal right for you to do that in order for you to be able to exercise your full rights to parent participation. I think it's critical. That's me, but you need to check your regulations. Don't really care if a Board of Education tells me no. What are they going to do about it? They record you all the time, guys, and you just don't know that they do. All right. I can't tell you how many principals, the minute somebody comes in there, just hits the record button on their computer. It's very standard. And how do I know that? Because I get access to your records, guys, in your cases, and I see all of this stuff. I know it's happening. And I'm talking about my active cases. I'm just not going out willy-nilly getting people's cases. My active cases, we get the benefit of being able to acquire the school records. And so I know that those recordings are happening. So, but just, you need to make sure that there is a good documentation as to what occurs in this meeting. Because if you don't have an IEP heading into this new school year, then I'm telling you, that's going to be a wild ride, potentially a wild ride in that IEP meeting. So if the district is doing virtual learning only for the start of the school, then the next recommendations are very important for you to remember. And that is, placement is only discussed at the end of an IEP meeting and after the IEP is developed. You do not discuss placement options. And if it's a virtual only learning environment, then guys, in that situation, they would be discussing placement because that is your one option. There's no other options that they're willing to consider. But does that option provide your child with a FAPE? No. So therefore, it would be predetermining for them to sit there and discuss that it's just learning only, or it's virtual learning only, or it's hybrid only, and we're only going to allow your child to go 2 days a week. They should not be discussing this stuff in the beginning of your meeting. Now, if they do, they have diarrhea of the mouth, then they just gave you a nice little treat, because it enhances and helps your case. Because predetermination, discussing the stuff in advance of developing the IEP is a huge, huge no-no. Huge no-no. Why is that? Because the IEP team has a legal responsibility to provide the IEP or to develop the IEP in a manner that is calculated to provide the child with a free and appropriate public education. They don't sit there and say, well, we're doing virtual only, so we're going to create the IEP to fit into that square peg, even though your child is a round learner. Okay, that's what predetermination means, which means that your child's being denied their right to a free and appropriate public education. That also means that the IEP was developed and not calculated to provide a FAPE, and they knew it, because they're just trying to shove this temporary placement on you. And that's wrong. They can't do that. So they want to go down that road, fine, but do not participate in it. They want to talk about it. They want to have diarrhea of the mouth. Let them. Hopefully you're recording. Hopefully you're writing it down. That they're sitting there discussing this in the beginning. And by the way, if you're only taking notes in these meetings, make sure that the LEA signs your notes after they read them for accuracy. Make sure that you get their initials so that they can't sit there and claim later that you somehow just created these notes and that's not how the meeting went. Be smarter than that, okay? Okay. So I discussed predetermination. If the IEP team members begin discussing placement options like virtual only at the beginning of the meeting, then that's a big no-no, all right? The IEP needs to be developed in a manner and way that provides your child with a FAPE. If your child did not benefit from distant learning in the spring and he or she is a student that requires in-person instruction in order to receive a FAPE, then that is how the IEP needs to be developed. This would be a traditional IEP, as though no virus or other impeding factor exists. Be careful to not allow them to insert virtual into this IEP that you're developing. If it is not the way that your child learns and not the way that your child can receive a free, appropriate public education. Okay? Like I said, legal responsibility to provide a FAPE. Then at that point, after you develop that IEP, then you discuss about whatever impediments exist because they're temporary impediments. Okay? And then you can sit there and argue about that. But at least you have a foundational IEP that is developed to provide the child a FAPE. The IEP need to, okay. This IEP that I'm talking about, the traditional one that is designed to provide the FAPE, needs to be developed for in-person services and accommodations only. With this caveat, if you do have a child, and like I said, there's not going to be many, where it is possible for them to receive a FAPE through a hybrid model or through a virtual only model, and there are clients that I've had that is exactly what we developed and it does work for them, then great. This information really isn't for you because the IEP that you would be developing would be developed to provide a FAPE, okay? This is only for those children that require the in-person services in order to accomplish FAPE and make tangible progress. So at the end of the IEP meeting and after the traditional in-person IEP is created, then discuss how it will be implemented. That's the placement discussion. That's what that whole LRE is, right above the signature page. Now, if at this point they say virtual only for the first 9 weeks, then you need to indicate your disagreement. If the team keeps pushing virtual from the beginning of the IEP meeting and refuses to develop a traditional in-person IEP, then do not get hostile or emotional. Okay, meaning that you may not even make it to the end of your IEP because they could sit there and be so upset with you and so mad that you won't capitulate and you just will not do it. They may terminate the meeting. Let them. Let them. Okay? Don't get hostile. Don't get emotional. Because it benefits you if they don't complete the IEP meeting. Okay? Because it wasn't you that was the impediment. It wasn't you. They have the legal responsibility, not you. Check your emotions. Be calm about this. All right? It will all get worked out. Believe you me, it will get worked out. But don't sit there and go, oh, we're going to do that. If they want to end the meeting because they're mad at you, let them. But don't let them get out of there. Hold on. Don't let them get out of there, guys, without providing you. You merely need to stand your ground that your child does not benefit from virtual learning or let's say a hybrid model to where they have arbitrarily limited the available days that your child can attend, you need it notated that you disagree and why. So you need to sign the document and explain next to your signature why you disagree. So any blank space available on the official documents, then you need to state your disagreement and why. Okay? If they're trying to shut the meeting down because they're mad at you before even finishing the IEP meeting, then you need to sit there and say that you're going to wait for them to complete a prior written notice explaining why you could not complete the IEP. Okay? You state that your child requires, if you're writing your disagreement on the official documents, you state that your child requires in-person school services in order to receive a FAPE, and that you do not agree to virtual only or a forced hybrid model if no exceptions are offered of additional days or services. You need to request a prior written notice explaining everything, their refusal to develop a traditional school-based IEP or their refusal to provide in-person school-based services, and then you simply notate your disagreement with the school's decision. You will need to act quickly after getting that prior written notice by filing a due process complaint. Okay? Now, if the IEP team with parental consensus agree after developing the traditional IEP that virtual learning is the temporary need due to student or family health circumstances or need, the family health circumstances or need, then a prior written notice can be created to indicate that a traditional IEP was developed for implementation if when the student transitions back to the school, but that due to the health needs and or concerns of the family, virtual learning has been selected and therefore a distance learning plan will be developed with the understanding of the IEP team that the developed IEP is the one designed to provide a FAPE and not the DLP. Now, why do I recommend it be written that way? Because guys, you as a parent don't have a legal duty to provide a FAPE. The school does. So I understand with some families that this is not going to be good for them and it's absolutely out of their control, because I have many clients like that to where due to the fragility of their health, they just cannot go to school. And we have to sit there and work out or try to work out very flexible and to the best of our ability, extensive homebound services. But is it equivalent to what the children would get if they were attending in a traditional environment? No. I mean, that's near impossible. And that isn't the requirement in certain situations. I mean, it's difficult to sort of really trying to get into the nitty gritty of explaining that. So there are going to be some of you guys that because of your child being in a high risk group, that there's going to be some nuances there, but there's going to be some of you to where the child is healthy, but there are family members that are high risk and you just are not comfortable sending them. Guys, at that point, I mean, I hate to break it to you, and I'm being a realist about this. The school needs to provide, they need to develop that traditional IEP to provide a FAPE. And then any decisions, whether you feel like you have options or choices, that has to be that backup. But everybody's got to recognize that that's not what FAPE is. That due to whatever family circumstance, we're having to do this, but this is what FAPE is. And there are going to be some exceptions out there, and I think I mentioned them in a prior video. I think video number 3, 1 of 3, I went into children that have medical complications and medical recommendations. Then at that point, it takes a little bit different standard with regards to how a school would address a traditional IEP. Okay? Now, This is my advice for school districts to do it right and legally protect themselves from some due process challenges, because they're not going to be able to protect themselves from most, especially if you're in a school district to where the inflexibility is there, or they're only providing for one option, and that could be full in-school attendance, without recognizing the circumstances for family and staff. I mean, just like the other one, to where they're doing virtual only with no other alternatives available for staff and for children. Okay. Schools don't need to be inflexible, and they don't need to be community bullies at this point. Some of them are choosing that, and it's not going to end well for them. Okay, regardless of what your Board of Education decides, if there are not orders from the state governor shutting down schools and or mandating virtual learning only, then any decision to go virtual or distance learning only is a choice, meaning that other choices can or could have been made. The federal government gave no waivers to the schools pertaining to their legal duty to provide IEP identified students with a FAPE. School personnel are fully aware which students can receive a FAPE and benefit from distant learning and virtual learning, and which students did not log on, did not benefit, and could not receive a FAPE in this format. You know it, guys, from the spring. You know you can pinpoint which ones of your students were benefiting and which ones were not. Okay, you can sit there and narrow down your list very, very well as to who you need to spend extra attention on to ensure that they are afforded a FAPE with regards to developing the 2021 IEP. So any developed IEP for the 2021 school year needs to be developed in a way that can provide the child with a free, appropriate public education. If that is in-person traditional school services, then develop the IEP that way, because that is what FAPE is. Okay? That protects you. If your Board of Education has limited student access to alternating days or determined to go virtual for all students, then you create a prior written notice indicating that an IEP was developed that is anticipated to provide the student with a FAPE, meaning that traditional in-school IEP, but, and this is where you notate it on the prior written notice, but the Board of Education has, chosen virtual only, or has limited access to the school to virtual only, or hybrid days, limiting, kids by last name to do 2 days a week. This is where you explain, we developed a traditional IEP, but administrative decisions have determined this. Put it in the prior written notice. It protects you. If the parent is in agreement with the virtual learning or alternating days, then notate that the parent agrees, but you also need to notate that FAPE can only be provided under the developed IEP, but that the parent has opted for virtual or alternating days. So at that point, if it's virtual, then develop a DLP. And if it's alternating days, then the IEP that you created can be followed to the best that you're capable under the limited access of the student. But now you've got a prior written notice that has already explained that, okay? This is what FAPE is, but this is what we're doing in the meantime, and the parent agrees to that. Now, if the parent disagrees with the board determination of alternating days or virtual only, then notate in the prior written notice the parent disagreement and give the parent a copy of the developed IEP and the prior written notice, and don't argue with them. You as an educator did your legal duty of developing an IEP that anticipates the child receiving a FAPE. If that can only be accomplished in a traditional school setting, then that is how the IEP should be developed. If the child can receive a FAPE through virtual, then fine, but that's rare. You have no control over the decisions of the Board of Education and administration. You can only control what you can control. And as an IEP team member, that is your responsibility to develop an IEP that provides the child with a FAPE, including their placement. If the parent disagrees with the board decisions for limited participation or virtual only, then the parent understands that you had nothing to do with that, and they would need to challenge that decision in due process. You did your job in developing a good IEP that offers a FAPE. Now, you may have a boss that directs you to do the opposite and then bully you into developing IEPs for virtual only or limited participation. It will be your choice in what you do, but know that it isn't the right one and will unnecessarily involve you in a conflict created by administration. When that happens, then bad leaders tend to blame those below them, and that would be you. Some of you will be put in impossible situations as far as educators, and I'm sorry that the system does that to you. I do see it all the time. It's incredibly frustrating to me to sit in these meetings with educators that are stone silent, that I can see behind their eyes that they don't want to be there, that they were told to sit down and shut up, that they were told not to provide additional insight or information that would be beneficial to the child or the family. I can see in the eyes and in the body language of a lot of these educators that are sitting in these meetings with me. I can see that that they're distraught and pained by being pulled into that. And I really do take extra effort, guys, not to pull teachers. Outside of abuse allegations, I mean, if it's programming, if it's a lack of resources, if it's a lack of training, those aren't teachers' faults. That's administration's fault for overloading your classroom, not providing you the training and not providing you with the support that you need to do your job. Your union should be filing complaints about that, but they don't. You have a job duty. You would think that your union would get involved and fight for you to be able to get these resources. And so many times I can tell you definitively that a lot of the times it's not even the special education director that I'm upset at, because I understand that the special education director has a budget, and many of these boards and many of these superintendents and many of these principals don't like to spend money on special education. And so they'll sit there and they'll rob Peter to pay Paul, meaning that they'll take from special education or Title I funds, mix it around and sneak it over here to sit there and pay for artificial turf or pay for football uniforms. I see it all the time. I see where they supplement coach salaries by declaring them glorified special education aides or grant writers. That's another way that they can spend Title I or special education money, is by creating BS positions like grant writer, and be able to pull down $89,000 a year. I've seen it, guys. I know how this happens. Accounting in education is no different than accounting in big corporations. That you sit there and you wonder how Google or Amazon can make billions and billions of dollars and then end up paying zero in United States taxes. It's not that difficult. It's just accounting, guys. It's moving numbers from here over to here and showing whatever you want to show. What do you think's going on right now? With what the media is doing and with the inconsistency on the data on COVID deaths, COVID positive rates. What does that even mean? It is accounting, guys, but it's so horribly wrong in so many cases. It is not a shock to me that so many parents don't know who to believe, what to believe, where to turn, and what to do. And that includes educators. And I feel sorry for all of us because we're all sort of on this ride we can't get off of. But in this situation, do your best as a parent and as an educator to plan for a calm future for our children. This has been catastrophically tumultuous. We have no idea what this is going to do long term to their social emotional development, because it's a big deal for them. I mean, I still remember, I can still go in my child's mind and remember the feelings I had watching NBC special reports about the Soviet Union and the nuclear build up, how many warheads the Soviets had as opposed to the United States. I can still remember the fear because I didn't understand. I was interpreting things in my child mind, and a lot of that was exaggerated. But when you're a child and you have lost, you have little to no control over your environment. That is why our job and our role as parents, our job and our role as professional educators, is so incredibly important to be calming during this time period. And we're failing, guys. We're failing miserably. Turning all this political, getting so emotional and bent out of shape, showing our fear in front of our kids. So unnecessary, so damaging. But we can start now in setting a different path and charting a different path. And what is that? Plan for a calm school year, even if we're not starting that way. Plan for one. Plan for an IEP that provides for a FAPE. And we'll deal with the fallout, guys. I mean, it's inevitable. There are going to be an increase in due process complaints. Let's not get emotional about it. We don't have to sit there and be angry at each other about, impossible decisions. And some of these are impossible decisions. But I can tell you, once again, if you're allowing football players and cheerleaders and band to participate in cross country and anything else, if you're allowing that to occur, then I'm sorry, guys. If you're allowing for scattered days, I can tell you that my major concern, and then I'm going to shut this off. My major concern is going to be if any of this nonsensical contact tracing takes hold. Okay, I don't trust departments of health within government institutions. I don't want them to have more power, and they have not done a good job during this COVID situation at all. Infused with some power that the things that I've read, the things that I've seen, I don't want them to have more. But to sit there and have this contact tracing, if it actually takes hold and gains steam, then is it a possibility that some parent decides to go get tested? I mean, you know what the saying is, well, I'm going to shut up. I don't need you guys burning me in effigy for what I'm going to say. But look, we're finding out that there's a very unacceptable and high false positive rate with these COVID tests, many of which were fast-tracked by the FDA because we just simply did not have enough tests. And that's worldwide, guys. All right, it wasn't limited to the United States. So of course you had opportunistic pharmaceuticals and other company, biomedical or medical, coming up with these tests, and they're already sort of sketchy. If you look on the label, you Google it, look on the label, let's say of LabCorp's COVID or flu test or COVID test, and you're going to see a disclaimer on there that there's a high risk of getting a false positive, and then explaining what the potential consequences are for you getting a false positive, meaning that you tested positive for COVID, but in reality were negative, and it showed up as positive, but in reality you don't have it. So if there's a high rate of false positives, what are the potential consequences? Well, potential consequences, according to the LabCorp warning label, is that you wouldn't be able to go to work. You'd have to quarantine for 14 days. Things of that nature. So it would cause you a financial damage, and that's the disclaimer to where you can't come back and sue LabCorp because they put it on their warning label. So, and we're finding out. In fact, the Connecticut, their state health department just slapped a warning on one of the most popular COVID tests on the market right now that was fast tracked with FDA approval. That they have a warning that they have put out that they have discovered huge discrepancies in the number of false positives, almost 50%. So, guys, that's not me knocking anything. We're doing the best we can, and of course we're going to fast track some of this stuff. I get it, okay? But what could false positives do with regards to the next 9 weeks? And I think that that's sort of why some of these schools are making the decisions that they're making, is because of that real possibility that if a student was tested, and let's say got a positive result, let's say it's a false positive, let's say it was an actual positive for COVID. Then at that point, they do the contact tracing. They end up shutting down the classroom. They end up potentially shutting down the entire school and then forcing everybody onto a 14-day quarantine. I already know people that are friends of mine, colleagues that tested positive, no symptoms whatsoever, but they were still forced into a 14-day quarantine. Okay? It's our imperfect world, and we're just trying to get through it, okay? So I'm not complaining about it, but I'm just saying that some of these things are not that reliable, but will have consequences with regards to contact tracing. I understand that. So I'm not necessarily against virtual as an option for most of the students. I'm not against that. But I am against those students that cannot learn in that capacity. I'm also against it for our most vulnerable students in the other federal subgroups that are tracked that have a historical disenfranchisement, and that would be poverty, African American, and Latino. And in New Mexico, I would include our native tribes. I do believe that exceptions need to be made where they need to be made for working families, whatever. If you know that kids weren't logging on, possibly because both parent, or let's say it's a single family, and the one parent's, let's be reasonable about this. Okay? I mean, a lot of schools aren't, and they're just sort of say this is what we're going to do, and it's uniform, and that just isn't the way to solve a problem. I hope this was beneficial. Comment, and we'll continue to have these discussions and have this evolve and work through this together. Okay?